Let's do an experiment. Somewhere around 100,000 years ago, a person kneels at the edge of a muddy waterhole, dips a hollow gourd into it, and drinks. A few days later, half their camp is doubled over sick, and nobody knows why. Here's the thing. They didn't need to know why. They just needed to notice that it kept happening. And somewhere in that noticing, completely by accident, humanity stumbled onto the first engineering project it ever really committed to. Making water not kill you. Not finding safe water. That's a different story. This one is about something more ambitious. The moment humans stopped just searching for clean water and started actively building it. Because that shift from passive luck to deliberate technology might be one of the quietest, most underrated inventions our species ever made. So, how did we get from muddy gourds to municipal treatment plants? Turns out, the whole story runs through about 5 ideas, and remarkably, we're still using every single one of them today. The first purification method humans ever used wasn't invented, it was noticed. Leave muddy water sitting still in a container long enough, and something happens. Gravity gets to work. Heavier particles, silt, grit, debris, sink to the bottom, and the water on top gradually clears. This is called sedimentation, and it requires zero technology, zero understanding of chemistry, and zero effort beyond patience. Early humans almost certainly discovered it the same way they discovered most things. By leaving water in a container overnight because they were too tired to drink it, then noticing the top half looked better in the morning. Here's a number worth sitting with. Some of the oldest medical writing we have, the Egyptian Ebers Papyrus, dated to around 1500 BCE, already describes clarifying water using a substance called alum, a naturally occurring mineral salt that makes suspended particles clump together and sink faster. Which means humans weren't just letting water settle by accident anymore. By the time writing existed, somebody had already figured out how to speed the process up and had been doing it long enough that it made it into a medical reference text. That's not luck. That's engineering. Just very old, very quiet engineering. But settling water only removes what's heavy enough to sink. It does nothing about what's actually making people sick, and for tens of thousands of years, nobody knew that what's actually making people sick was invisible. So evolution's cheap trick kicked in again. Humans didn't need the theory, they just needed a method that worked, repeated it, and passed it on. That method was fire. Once early humans could reliably control flame, boiling became possible, though not the way you're picturing. Long before pottery that could survive direct heat, the method was almost certainly stone boiling. Heat rocks in a fire until they're glowing, then drop them into a water-filled skin, gourd, or wood-lined pit. The water heats, sometimes to a full boil, and although nobody involved had the faintest idea why, the sickness rates went down. This is worth pausing on because it's a genuinely strange kind of discovery. Nobody understood proteins denaturing or bacterial cell walls rupturing under heat. The chain of logic was almost embarrassingly simple. Boiled water, fewer people got sick, keep boiling water. That's it. That's the whole scientific method, running on pure trial and error, no hypothesis required. Evolution doesn't care about your reasons. It only cares whether you survive long enough to do it again. But boiling has a problem. It takes fuel, time, and a container that can handle heat. Not exactly convenient if you're on the move, or if wood is scarce. So somewhere along the way, humans reinvented an idea nature had already been running for millions of years: filtration. Push water through the right material, and particles get trapped while liquid passes through. Sand does it. Gravel does it. Layers of cloth do it. And here's where the story gets a specific name attached to it for the first time. Hippocrates, the Greek physician working around 400 BCE, described a device that later physicians nicknamed the Hippocratic sleeve, a bag made of cloth used to strain boiled water and remove sediment before drinking. It's one of the earliest documented, deliberately engineered water filters in history, and it's essentially a fabric coffee filter for civilization's oldest addiction, not dying of dysentery. Around the same era, on the other side of Asia, Sanskrit medical texts, the Sushruta Samhita, compiled somewhere around 2000 to 1000 BCE, describe purifying water by heating it, exposing it to sunlight, and filtering it through sand and charcoal. Charcoal is the interesting one here because, unlike sand, which just physically blocks particles, charcoal actually adsorbs certain organic compounds and impurities at a molecular level. Nobody in 1000 BCE could explain adsorption chemistry. They just knew. Water filtered through burnt wood tasted better and caused less illness than water that wasn't. Good enough. Write it down. Pass it on. Here's a detail that sounds almost like folklore, except it's chemically real. Ancient Persian royalty reportedly stored their drinking water in silver vessels, believing it stayed purer for longer. And it turns out they were accidentally right. Silver and copper both have what's called an oligodynamic effect, meaning trace metal ions released into the water actively damage bacterial cell membranes. Egyptian and Persian households used copper vessels for similar reasons, centuries before anyone had a word for antimicrobial. Which means, without a shred of microbiology, multiple ancient civilizations independently arrived at the same conclusion from opposite directions. The container matters as much as the water. That's not a coincidence. That's thousands of years of quiet, distributed experimentation converging on the same answer. The same way rivers separated by continents eventually carved the same kinds of valleys. But alum, boiling, filtering, and silver jugs only get you so far. Those are solutions for a family, maybe a small village. What happens when you're trying to keep an entire city alive? This is where purification stops being a personal survival skill and becomes infrastructure. The Romans famously built aqueducts, but the genuinely clever part wasn't just moving water across long distances. It was the settling tanks built along the way, called piscinae, chambers specifically designed to slow water down long enough for sediment to sink out before it ever reached a household tap. In parts of the Indian subcontinent, elaborate stepwells served a similar dual purpose: access to groundwater that had been naturally filtered on its way down through rock and soil, layered with social and religious ritual that, not coincidentally, kept people from contaminating the source. Notice what's happening here. The exact same four ideas: settle it, boil it, filter it, store it in something that won't poison it further, just kept getting scaled up. A gourd left overnight becomes a settling tank serving 50,000 people. A cloth sleeve becomes a filtration chamber built from cut stone. Nothing fundamentally new was invented. The ideas were ancient. Civilization just built bigger machines to run them. And here's the part that should genuinely stop you for a second. Walk into a modern water treatment plant today, the kind that serves millions of people, and you'll find exactly the same four steps: sedimentation, filtration, disinfection, safe storage. We've replaced alum with more precise coagulants, replaced charcoal with activated carbon and reverse osmosis membranes, replaced fire with chlorine and UV light. But the underlying logic, the actual idea, hasn't changed in 3,000 years. That's the strange, quiet truth about a lot of human progress. It doesn't usually arrive as a lightning bolt of genius. It arrives as an accident someone happened to notice, repeated until it became a habit, refined until it became a tool, and scaled until it became civilization. Nobody sat down at any point in this story and said, "I am inventing water purification." They just really didn't want to get sick again, and over enough generations, that was more than enough. You will probably drink water today without thinking about it once. But somewhere behind that glass is an unbroken chain of people who left water sitting overnight, dropped hot rocks into gourds, strained rain through cloth, and stored their water in silver, testing, failing, surviving, and passing the answer on for about 10,000 generations until it built the pipe running to your kitchen.